So in this video, we're gonna populate the control board for the full auto tail of the FDL3. Let's go. What's going on, guys? So in this video, I'm gonna show you how to populate the control board for the FDL3. This is for the full auto tail. So we have our parts here. I'm gonna go over each individual part as I put them on the board, just so that there's little confusion. I think if I go over them all at once, we'll have to go over them again. So let's do things like that. If you are interested in building the DCP board or the front nose, this is the 40 nose to the FDL3. I linked a playlist below in which I started with this, and if you're looking for how to populate the power board, that is in this video. I've decided to do separate videos on these just because they are pretty involved, and to add that to like a build of, like, say the back half, you're looking at like a 3-hour video. Maybe not, maybe like 2 or whatever, but it just, I don't know. I did this video and it turned out to be an hour and a half, so I'm gonna split it up just the way it's searchable and whatnot, so that this video is for the control board. So without further ado, let's get this onto the quad hands and get you guys on a closer lens. Let's go. Okay, so starting off here, we want to grab our control board, and we want to put the FDL3 control board version 1.4 on the right hand side. Buzzer is going to go right here where this big circle is on the left hand side. So when building a board like this, if you are just starting out, we want to do the closest stuff to the board first and then build our way up. So I guess the easiest way to say that is you want to build houses in the neighborhood before you go building skyscrapers. But anyway, this particular board, as we can see, we're looking at a lot of resistors. So right here we've got a 1K resistor, we've got a 1K there, and up here we've got a 1K and a 7K. So from the looks of things, I want to start with this 7K resistor. And that's actually, it's kind of cut off. That's actually a 4.7K. That's just know that that's the printing is kind of screwed up there. So that's this guy here. That's a resistor, 4.7K. That's a CFR16J 4K7. So in this package, we have one of those. So for a resistor, there is no polarity. So direction does not matter. You can put it either side first. I typically go for the gold to the left. There you go. As you can see, the coloration on this looks like gold, red, purple, yellow. So this guy is the 4.7. So we're going to place this right here and place it all the way down to the board, and then I'm splaying out the ends just like that. Okay, and just so we don't get these screwed up, I'm going to solder that in place now. So to solder, I am using the FM2027. This is hooked into the FX951, and as far as the tip that I'm using, this is the T15D12. It's a 1.2 millimeter chisel tip. As we wait for that guy to heat up, there you go. And this is a really small solder joint here, but this tip it'll get you in there just fine, just like that. Just heat it up and add a little bit of solder, just like that. And we're gonna flip this guy back over. I'll get you a nice close-up view there. That's my solder joint, and we're gonna flip it over and then make sure the solder has, as you can see, it kind of came up a little bit more than I wanted to, but as long as that's not bridging anything, that's just fine. So we're done there. Go ahead and cut these lines off. And I usually cut these just pretty close to the board. These flush cutters are very good for getting into places like that. Okay, so now that that one's done, we want to get the 1K resistors, and those are the CFR 16J1K0, resistance of 1K, and there's 4 of them that we have purchased. And as you can see, we're going to put one right there, one right there, one right there, and one right there. And as you can see, they're labeled resistor 1, resistor 3, resistor 2, and resistor 5. Obviously, resistor 4 we have already placed. I'll go ahead and pull these guys out. And in case you're wondering what the coloration is on them, they are gold, red, brown. Excuse me, gold, red, black, brown. Okay, so I'm going to put the gold to my left. And I'm just going to pull these out one at a time. So our first guy is going to go right here in resistor 1. Splay those ends out. And for this, I'm going to go one wire this way and then one wire this way, only because of these guys here. And that's just so we don't get tangled up later. So this next guy, we're going to go into, I'll put this in resistor 5 right now. So that's right there. Come on. Oh, see that this one's gonna break my stones. There we go. Look at that. Look at that. Right in there. Right stinking in there. Perfect. Okay, now we're gonna populate resistor 2 and 3. And these guys are pretty small. Okay, pop that in there. Just like that. And then this final one, we're going to go into resistor 3 slot. Right there. Okay, push these down, splay them legs out, and go ahead and flip the board over. Okay. Now we can go ahead and solder these in place. Again, as you saw earlier, we don't really need a lot of solder, so I'm not going to put that much. We want to make sure we get each and every one. And we want a nice clean solder tip. As you can see, this one's starting to get a little mucked up. Okay, and I gotta get this one here. Okay, once you're done with that, double check to make sure you've hit all of them. Flip it over and make sure they're seated flush with the board. That is perfect. And then we can cut all these off once we're satisfied with the placement. That's all the ends trimmed, just like that. And that's all our resistors in place. So I think the next thing that we're gonna do is install this transistor right there. And we're gonna come back to this guy. We have a 2N4401BU, or ND, depending on whose part number we're looking at. So we have seen this guy before in the DCP build, this guy right there. So we do have 2 of them. This will be our second and final one. And if you look at this guy here, you will see the top is rounded, but there is a flat spot. The flat spot has a bit of writing on it. That flat spot coincides with this flat spot marked here. And we're gonna place this as such. For this, we're just going to splay these legs out just a little bit. Not unlike the other one, they're all 3 in a row. Just go ahead and push that down till you reach a bit of tension. It's not going to seat flush, and we're not looking for it to. Something like that. This is about, I want to say that's about a 1/16 of an inch off the board, the bottom of this anyways. And you can bend those legs a little bit just to hold it in place while you flip it over and solder it in place. And for something like this, just give one leg a solder, flip it over, make sure it's seated where you want. And as you can see, we don't need to add too much solder to this joint because it's a fairly small joint. So just a quick tap or two with the solder just to cover the pad, because once that pad's covered, then it starts seeping through. So there's a closer look. As you can see, just a quick tap or two is all you need. Earlier when I put too much, but that will work. Just make sure we're not bridging any of the pads. So once you're happy with that, go ahead and cut the legs off of that. Okay, so we're all set there. It's the transistor in place. So the next thing that we're going to want to do is, okay, so the next part we're going to install is the center dip switch, and that is 7323831-5-ND. So if you notice with this guy, there is an on and a 1, and there's only 2 pins. So we're going to place this with the buzzer to our left. This is going to go right in the center there with the on button up. So to do this, I'm going to hold this in place upside down and just going to bend these legs just a little bit, just to hold it in place long enough to solder it, just like that. And then I'll cut those off. What I'm going to do is only solder one, make sure it's sitting flush the way I want it, and then I'll go back and I'll resolder the other one. And that is sitting exactly how I want it. So now we can go ahead and solder the other one. Okay, and I'm going to cut the legs off of this. Okay, so that's our dip switch installed. And again, you want, if this circular buzzer is to the left, you want the on to say on. You don't want it upside down. It really doesn't matter because there's only one in and one out. So you can install it upside down if you want, but this is the way I put it. All right, so now that we have that installed, let's go ahead and install our buzzer. So our buzzer is part number 102/1152-ND. And this guy, you want to pay attention here. Let me see if I can show you. There is a positive and negative. There you go. So there is a positive and negative, as you can see, the positive there and then the negative here. We want to pay attention to those, and we want to pay attention. You got the positive here and then the negative there. This is how we're going to place this. So the positive on the bottom, and then this guy just slips right in there, just like that. So same thing here. I'm going to flip this over, and I'm going to bend these pins just to hold it in place, and then solder one, make sure it's in the proper orientation, and then go back and so there we go. I'm only going to solder one. I'm going to make sure it's seated the way I want, and once I know that it is, go back and solder the other one in place. that. Oops, sorry, that's off camera. There you go. It's a little too much solder on this one. Once you're happy with that, go ahead and cut the legs off. That one I accidentally cut right to the board. That is okay. So that's our buzzer. Okay, for this next step, let's go ahead and install this 10-pin rail. For that, we've seen these guys before. This 10-pin rail is going to connect into this 10-pin rail of the DCP board. So what we want to do is we want to count out 10 pins, or you can go like this, so you don't have to count nothing. Line it up there, make sure you got all your pins satisfied, and then you can cut it right there. Okay, so that's the easy way to do that. So this, because this control board sits on top of that DCP, we're going to solder this in from the back, just like this. Okay. And then we're going to solder on the front. So the way I'm going to do this, hold this in place. And you can hold this with your finger if you'd like and solder one side. What we're going to do is just solder one pin and make sure it's lined up. And once we're satisfied with how it's lined up, we're going to go on the other side and solder that pin. And the reason for this is to make sure this is seated exactly where you want it. Like this is not, so I'm just going to heat that pin up, line everything up, and then hold it until it solidifies, just like that. Once you're happy with that, go ahead and solder the opposite pin. Just like that, and then make sure again that you are satisfied with where that is seated, and if not, you can just hit it, push it in, and then hold it in place. How did that happen? Sorry about that focus. Okay, so I don't know what I lost there, so I'm just going to start over. So go ahead and solder the left pin. Go ahead and push this into place, and then just hit it with a bunch of heat. Make sure that you are lined up the way you want. Once that's all set, go ahead and solder the opposite end pin. And then if you are happy with the placement, then you can go ahead and solder the remaining pads. And I like to alternate left and right. And the reason I like to do that is so that heat doesn't build up on one end of the pad or the other. And so what will happen is if the heat builds up, this thing can walk out of place, and you will not be able to, without a hot air rework station, be able to fix it. Okay, so that's all. Sorry about this. Focus is getting wild there. I will fix that. Okay, so that's all 10 pins soldered in place. And as you can see, that's nice and straight, just like that. That's exactly what I wanted. So now this guy can fit on top of our DCP board, just like that. Okay, that's how we want that. So now that we have that set, we can go over here. There's 8 pins here, and then there's 8 pins here. We're going to install the female pin headers, which are right here. There's 2 of those. These are 8 pins a piece, and the part number on those is S7006/ND. I'm going to start with the one right in the center. Same thing with this. We're going to put this in place, hold it in place, and then only solder one pin. I'm actually just gonna hold it. I'm not even gonna clip to it because it's right in the center there. I'm just gonna hold it in place. You know, if it's sitting like this, I'm just holding it like this with the gripper arm there, and just gonna hit it with a little bit of light solder. Okay, just like that. And then I'm going to come back. So you can see it's not quite lined up to the way I want it. There you go. So I'm going to press it to where I want it with my fingers and then just heat up that single pin and make sure that's in place. So there you go. That's exactly where I want it. I want that straight up and down as possible, because we're going to be putting a component that bridges those two, the two 8-pin pads. So we want that as straight up and down as possible. There's a spark fun that goes on top of that. There's a little, it's like an LCD readout screen. So that's where we want that. Now go ahead and solder the other pin on the opposite side and just make sure that is where you left it. Just like that. And just for good measure, I'm going to heat it up and push this into the board to make sure nothing has moved. Okay, so now that is set. Now go back and do the remaining 6 pins. Okay, and there you go. That's the 6 pins done. It's a total of 8 pins done, and that is sitting relatively upright at this point. The next thing we're going to do is the one to its left, right there. Same thing, this is facing up, and we're going to do just 1 pin. I'm going to hold it in place with one of the other arms, just underneath it like that. Not going to grab it. Okay, oops, right there. All right, and the same thing here. I'm just going to hit this real quick with a quick dab of solder just to hold it in place. Okay, as you can see, that's way off, so I'm just going to apply some heat to the newly placed solder joint, hold that where I want it like that, and we are good, just like that. So now I'm going to repeat the same for this pin. Make sure this is where I want it. It's nice and flush against the board. And just for good measure, I'm just going to push it in like that. Perfect. So now go ahead and do the remaining 6 pins. There you go. And that's up to you if you want to cut those or not. I think these are going to leave. So the next thing we're going to do is install these switches. And these switches extend from the bottom of the board. These are part number 450-1661/ND. And we want 6 total of them. So these guys, as you can see, there's 2 pins. As you can see, there's 2 pins for the switch, and then there's 2 pins to actually hold the switch in place. So when installing this switch, you're going to go in from the bottom of the board and press it firm all the way till you hit the little aluminum bracket there, and then those will hold in place just like that. Once you do that, you can go ahead and solder 1 pin each. These hold on pretty well, so I'm going to go ahead and install 3 on one side, and then I'm going to go and hit a pin of each just to hold them in place. Make sure that they are all solid in place and sitting flush against the board, and then I'll go back and resolder the remaining joints. Okay, so I'm gonna flip this over, and as you can see, none of these have moved. These are a nice solid joint. So with that, I'm gonna go and solder the remaining 3 pins for each switch. I'm gonna start with the larger ones first. These are what's holding this in place. And if you see me shivering, it is because I am. It's cold out here. It's like 20 degrees out. My hands are frozen. And that's partially the reason for splitting this up into multiple build videos, because I can only stand out here for about an hour at a time. It's cold. Okay. So that is the 3 switches installed. Just like that. I am not going to cut these. Just going to leave them as is, just making sure that I have good contact with all of those. All right, so once you get those in and soldered, go ahead and rotate the board, and we're going to install 3 of them here. Same thing, we want them underneath the board. That is all 6 of our switches installed. Now we can rotate the board back to the way we had it earlier. Just check our solder connections, and we're making sure that all those are pressed firmly to the board, and they are. So now that we've got all our switches in place and everything is soldered and checked, we can go to the last component on this board, which is the Rotary Encoder. So this is the PEC 11R 421 5K S0024 Rotary Encoder. Okay, so here we are. This is the Rotary Encoder, and as you can tell, there are 3 pins here, 2 pins here, and then 2. I can assume those are ground pins, and then obviously the encoder or the rotary section here. So the way this guy goes is, if we orientate the board so that our 8-pin header is on the top and the FDL CTL writing is on the bottom, you will see next to the switch the 3 pins there, and then the 2 pins there, the ground pins right and left there. So orientate the switch like that, place it flush, and then what we're going to do is, once again, solder 1 pin, make sure it's seated where you want it, and then carry on. And to do this, I'm sitting the quad hands up underneath it, just flush. I'm not holding onto it. And I'm going to solder one of the pins here. I'll do one of the ground pins. And this is where like the D12 comes in handy. It's a small tipped iron, but as you can see, it will do some of this large gauge solder with ease. So let's pull that out. And as we can see, the switch has pulled to one side. That's easy to fix. I'm going to push my finger on the switch, and I'm going to heat that joint. And once this thing moves, I'm going to release heat from the joint, hold it there for a second. So just like that, our switch is right back where I wanted it. And then I hold it in place just for that joint to cool off. If you don't, it will, it could crack the solder joint. There we go. Just a little bit of solder there. And I'm going to double check that this is seated right where I want it on all 4 corners, which it is. Everything is good. So once we're set there, just go ahead and solder your 3-pin and your 2-pin. And I'm going to hit these again because I can't really see that well if they're hit or not. I think they are. Actually, perfect. So that's a look at the bottom of the board. I'll put the 10 pins on the top there. That's a look at the bottom of the board, and then if I flip it over, that's a look at the top of the board. And let me flip it to the orientation that we started with. There you go. So as you can see, the DCP board will fit right underneath the control board, just like that. And if you're wondering what's gonna hold this from flopping around, the 3D printed part encapsulates all these switches, and then this sits flush along some of the prints there. So we'll get into that, but that's just a quick look at how these boards mate together. As you can see, nothing touches, and that's why we pushed over these components earlier, so that they don't touch anything inside of there. So everything is good, everything looks good, all our solder connections look good. So that's how to populate the control board of the full auto tail on the FDL3. It's a fairly easy build. It looks a lot more daunting than it appears when looking at the blank board. But just, you know, some of the things that you want to make absolute certain of is to make sure that these pin headers are lined up so we can attach the spark fun to it later. And also to make sure that these pins here are straight so that when we attach the DCP board to it, they're not going to be offset. That's going to sit like that. And then the other thing that you want to make sure is that none of the components from either board touches the other board. And this will be a lot more robust once that these are set inside of the 3D printed housing. So that completes the 3rd video in this series. If you need to go back, the 2nd video in the series is the completion of the DCP board, and the 1st video is the completion of the 40 nose. Again, links below for the playlist for those other 2 videos. The 4th video will be beginning the build of the full auto tail. And again, I'm not sure if we're gonna finish that in one video or not. I would like to, and then just make this like a 4-video set, but there is a lot to that with cutting wires and running them and whatnot. So that might end up being 2 videos, I don't know. And the reason I'm splitting it up is not really for the time. Well, yes, for the time, but I don't know if you can tell, but my hands are like white. It's 20 degrees out, and as I record these videos, it's only gonna get colder in this garage, so there's only so much it can handle. This is enough for today. My hands are frozen. So if you found this video helpful, if you're able to build one of these by following along, go ahead and click that thumbs up button. And if you think I've earned it, I started a Patreon page. The link for that is below in the description. And if you haven't done it already, go ahead and punch that subscribe button because it's fun and you only get to do it once. And I'll catch you later. Peace.